A nation is shaped by its leaders. The goals of good leadership should be service to humanity, but too often our leaders turn towards self-serving goals of money and power. When leaders betray and sacrifice their citizens repeatedly for 3 or 4 generations, a democratic society may begin to decay, then lose its way and descend into an authoritarian state, even when the vast majority of its citizens still believe in the ideals of their democracy.
After kerosene, a flammable hydrocarbon oil, was found in the 1850s to be useful in lighting homes instead of candles, a mad rush began for control of petroleum, from which kerosene was distilled. In the infancy stages of petroleum exploration, drills were pounded into the ground in order to break through to oil pockets, which lay beneath the surface of the earth. Pennsylvania emerged as the first major petroleum-producing state, where oil rigs protruded from the countryside. A mad rush to strike oil ensued as thousands of men sought their fortunes in the lamp oil industry. In 1862, during the Civil War, an agricultural commodities distribution company from Cleveland, Ohio, Clark and Rockefeller, entered the oil refining business. After many oil wildcatters had successfully discovered oil, the glut of supply drove down the price of oil to the point where the wood slat barrels were worth more than the oil they held. Kerosene sold for less than it cost to extract crude oil from the earth. A group of refiners formed a cartel which began to regulate kerosene supply and crude oil production, and this benefited Clark and Rockefeller's Standard Works Company in dramatic fashion. Many oil drillers and refiners went bankrupt, and so Clark was willing to sell out to John D. Rockefeller in 1867. Rockefeller and his cartel of oil refiners, through Freemasonry connections, received secret financing from the Passeur banking syndicates via the National City Bank of Cleveland. Daniel Passeur was the highest of French nobility, having changed his name from Crown Prince Louis, son of Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI. Their union was a marriage of Austrian and French aristocracy, but a rival banking syndicate out of Germany engineered the French Revolution of 1789 through the Freemasons and the Bavarian Illuminati. Prince Louis' parents lost their lives, but he retained their hidden fortune. After being smuggled out of France to a fortress on the Rhine, Louis arrived in England in 1804, protected by King George III, and was finally relocated to the United States. The royal paymaster of France, George Passeur, became George Bayshore and was given 600 acres in North Carolina by King George III. The prince bought gold mines through a trustee, including the Gold Hill Mining Company, and also began to finance and lease railroads with the advent of the steam engine. Passeur's Lancaster Railway, through the Alabama Mineral Company, and Standard Oil, Henry Ford's company, and many concerns including Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, General Motors, Boeing, Western Union, and AT&T. The Passeur's empire, Bank of Lancaster, became the North Carolina Bank, and then Nations Bank, which has now become Bank of America. Another trustee of the Passeur family was frontman J.P. Morgan. 2 books that detail these hidden alliances are David Icke's The Biggest Secret and Jim Marrs' Rule by Secrecy. Rockefeller, with this additional financing, incorporated Standard Oil Company of Ohio in 1870, and then formed a new partnership which included Henry Flagler and Jay Gould. Flagler and Gould's railroad industry connections helped Rockefeller when Gould created the Allegheny Transportation Company for moving crude oil to Standard in the most cost-efficient manner. by increasing the capacity of their trains to haul oil and by monopolistically gaining control of all crude oil transportation, the cabal became unspeakably powerful. An economic depression began in 1873 with the collapse of international banker Jay Cooke & Company that allowed Rockefeller to swoop in and buy up scores of bankrupt companies with oil field assets and oil refiners at pennies on the dollar, dramatically increasing Standard Oil's cash flow. By 1875, only 8 years after his buyout of Clark, the ruthless Rockefeller controlled nearly 80% of the oil distribution in the United States by 1. Limiting crude oil drilling and production, and 2. Limiting the amount of oil being refined in order to inflate the price of all oil products. Rockefeller controlled roughly 75% of all of the oil refining in the world when in 1879 Standard Oil set its sights on the Russian Baku oil fields. By 1880, Rockefeller owned or controlled 95% of all oil produced in the United States. The railroads, which had been the titans of commerce up until that time, fell to Rockefeller's leveraged power, as did gradually the government of the United States, which was manipulated by Rockefeller through his vast wealth and influence. The single greatest power in American industry had congealed: Standard Oil, controlled by one single man, John D. Rockefeller, whose evil business practices led mothers to warn their children to behave, or Rockefeller will get you. Having a stranglehold over the petroleum and kerosene industry for nearly 50 years gave Rockefeller unchecked power over the citizens of the United States, power greater than wielded by U.S. presidents, military generals, or any other captains of industry. By 1887, Standard Oil replaced the Bell Telephone Company as the largest corporation in America. Rockefeller made and broke as many political careers as he absorbed bankrupt oil companies, and for all intents and purposes, he had Capitol Hill in his hip pocket. Had Congress managed to set forth anti-monopoly legislation and restraints on the oil industry during those years and enforced such legislation, the course of our industrial development may have progressed less monopolistically. But after 50 years, which were early in the development of our young democracy, Rockefeller and his cabal were exerting a totalitarian influence over the economy and political direction of the United States. Little known to the public is the fact that the inventor of the horseless carriage road engine was not Henry Ford, but one George B. Selden. Selden sold his patent from 1895 to the Association of Licensed Automobile Manufacturers, and the companies in the fledgling industry were required to pay only 1% of their yearly earnings to this association. Henry Ford refused to abide by the Selden patent and was quoted as saying that Selden and his patent can go to hell. Rockefeller took an interest in Ford, whose case was lost when the court decided in favor of the Association of Licensed Automobile Manufacturers. Rockefeller came to Ford's defense with plenty of money and legal counsel, and when Ford appealed, the Court of Appeals overturned the previous decision, ruling in favor of Ford. The invention by Nikola Tesla of the AC induction motor around 1900 dealt a serious blow to Rockefeller and Ford's plans for an automobile industry that would rely heavily on crude oil refined into gasoline. This combination of a combustion motor and its need for gasoline could create a fortune for Ford and rescue Rockefeller from the falling price of kerosene due to the advent of electricity. Tesla's invention would create cars running on electricity and topple the giant, and using Ford and Thomas Edison, who tried to prove that AC was a danger, Rockefeller managed to turn the automobile industry towards combustion engines and gasoline. Ford's Model T became a hit, he became extremely wealthy, and Ford became a huge employer of labor in Michigan, a labor force he ruled over in a heavy-handed